Okay, perfect. So thank you for everybody for joining today. Obviously, we are now into 2022. So we're very appreciative of everybody putting some critical time in so early of the year to join us on one of our series of webinars that we'll be hosting throughout the year. Some hopefully fairly obvious housekeeping since we've all spent the last 2 years on Zoom, Teams, and all the other good webinar programs. We do have a couple of functionalities within here. We have the chat function to reach out to us with any comments or put the group in there as we do go through. And additionally, we do have the Q&A section. So as we are going through the subject of today, and if any questions do arise that you want to have like kind of a bit of a sidebar question on, or you want us to answer there and then, please feel free to put that out between myself, Chris, and Alyssa, who's administrating the back end. We'll be able to obviously jump on top of these questions. As everyone's just coming in now, we're getting a nice flurry of people come through. So again, hopefully by this point, and obviously the communications relationships we've had with everybody over the last year or so, you should all be somewhat aware and confident with obviously who we are. But for those who are joining new, welcome. My name is John Britton, and I am the Technical Director for Cybersecurity for Corvid Cyber Defense. And we'll begin our presentation very shortly. Just again, as a reminder, the chat function and the questions and answers are there. If we do not get to answer your question today, we will be leaving on the last slide with some communication methods that you can use. And there'll be a couple of handouts that will follow up as well as the recording, so you can get hold of that. Okay, perfect. So just to kind of put a preset on this, just so you are somewhat really aware with obviously who we are. We are Corvid Cyber Defense. We are a subdivision of Corvid Technologies, who are a DoD contractor. Our focus predominantly for their organization and for other small, medium businesses nationwide is to provide a single source cybersecurity as a service platform to enable organizations to meet all the needs and requirements that they are seeing. Part and parcel of obviously today is to talk about one specific requirement and conversation that you guys are likely to be seeing within your conversations. And that's obviously to enable you to take through a conversation with your clients around insurance and a few other objectives that we are seeing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all be the hype man for Chris Radford. A lot of you are probably familiar and have spoken to him before, but really want to set into stone the role and responsibility for Chris for you guys. Chris Radford, obviously, as you've all spoken to him, he is our national channels partner manager. And what that really means is it's his role to work and facilitate education with you guys to make sure that the strategy between ourselves, yourselves, and your clients is all aligned to enable a more successful transition from conversation to successful sale. So with that, I'd like to introduce Chris Radford.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for joining. So as John mentioned, our first series here that we're going to be doing is just kind of help to enable from sales tactics and sales enablement standpoint, handling objections. And, there's a variety of objections that we run across today. We're going to be talking about some of the things that John and I ran into at the end of the year, specifically around cyber insurance renewals, or people trying to obtain cyber insurance and running into some underwriting requirements that perhaps they've never seen in the past. And of course, this helps also to address a common objection where many of you may have already run into this, where, an SMB, a small, medium-sized business type customer, may feel that cyber insurance is really what their cybersecurity practice is all about. It's just having that stopgap. So it's something that we do run into, that, that sort of a false sense of security that having cyber insurance is a sufficient cybersecurity program. I'm sure everybody here on this call agrees that is not the case. Again, one of the analogies I often use is, you have to have, or you have homeowners insurance, but that doesn't necessarily mean you want your house to burn down. And of course, there's underwriting involved in all kinds of insurance, whether it's auto insurance or life insurance, property and casualty of any kind. And we're starting to see that massively trickle over into the cyber insurance space. So we want to talk about kind of addressing this issue that and not be a conversation stopper, but more of a conversation starter. And we do that by, in a lot of cases, maybe raising this issue. This could be done in person. This could be done through some type of email or marketing campaign. But I'm not a big fan of the phrase overcoming objections. I've been doing sales and sales training for 25 years now. And, you know, I'm from New Jersey, and overcoming the objection where I'm from turns into a fist fight in about 5 seconds, because it puts the customer on the defensive. I say something, they say something back, I say something back, and it becomes a little bit of a battle. Not to say that there are not going to be some things that come up that need to be overcome and dealt with, but it does tend to be more of a defensive type of conversation. When it comes to selling cybersecurity, especially in the SMB space, we can put our hands on 3, 4, 5 different things that we're going to run into on a pretty regular basis. So the way we handle these common objections, rather than overcoming them, is really by raising these issues first. And then we can get ahead of them, and we can kind of control the conversation a little bit more. One thing I've always said is not an objection if you bring it up. It's only an objection if they bring it up. And so when we take this proactive approach for these commonly encountered objections, and you've heard probably some of these, right? I'm too small to be attacked. Who would want to attack me? I have a firewall that does that. These are kind of some common things that we deal with on the SMB that we can get ahead of. I'll give you just a quick example. You know, a lot of the customers that I deal with in this area of your size feel like they're too small to be, you know, a victim of an attack. And let me show you what I've seen and what we've done to help smaller companies just be better protected. I'm the one that brings it up so that it's no longer an objection. And of course, what we're dealing with here today is, you know, I'm good. I already have cyber insurance, and we want to address that too in the same manner. Right? We want to make sure that we understand. So that's what we'll kind of talk about, some of the controls and things, some of the things that are coming down from the insurance carriers as something that they want to see happen from an underwriting standpoint. I was insurance for about 10 years, and I know one thing in terms of how they deal and what their policies and procedures and underwriting. It's all based off of claims paying experience. And the claims paying experience in the cyber insurance world has been terrible lately. And so it's inevitable that they're going to make underwriting changes to make sure that they can not have, or rather have, a positive claims paying experience. This is the NIST cybersecurity framework that's suggested for SMBs. There's a couple controls under each one of these, but this is the basic idea. Identification of your assets, people, employees, things of that nature. Some protection, which can include endpoint protection, can include firewalls, things of that nature. Detection techniques, things to identify threats that may be in the environment. How do you respond to any threats or anomalies that may be in the environment? And ultimately, what recovery backup systems do you have in place? But in what these cyber insurers have seen is companies doing a pretty decent job of identification. They're taking a crack at protection to a certain extent, not always ideal, and in many cases, as we'll walk through, not nearly good enough, because maybe a little bit different than larger or enterprise level companies that have the resources and the staff in place to do things like detection and response. It's not an easy thing for an SMB to do. And so when this limited protection piece fails, they go directly across this chart to recovery. And guess who's sitting in the recovery box? Cyber insurance carriers. So what they're doing is they're saying, we're not going to just be at the end of this thing when clearly if detection and response was in place, we may never get to this point. Using my house example from before. If I'm doing this from a homeowner's insurance policy standpoint and I mandate smoke detectors and fire extinguishers and fireproofing on seals and and ceilings and windows and so on and so forth. I have detection and response pieces in place there in that scenario if the fire did break out. And I would have a much better experience when I'm sitting over in the recovery box. They're doing the same thing for cybersecurity. They're mandating better protection. In a lot of cases, also detection and some type of response mechanism. It's a little bit of CYA, but you can't blame them. They're sitting over there right now from when we look at this framework and they're skipping 2 of the 5 boxes essentially, and they're left with the brunt of that. So think about that as the framework as we kind of talk through what they're asking small and medium-sized businesses to do to either obtain or retain their current cyber insurance policy and trying to protect themselves from this standpoint. We have got, this has increased, will continue to increase, and it offers an excellent opportunity for everybody on this call as a partner of ours to not only help these companies achieve these underwriting and requirements that they have, but also become an advisor to help them through that process. Obviously, sales come out of it as a result, but it really gives you an opportunity to put in an advisor role to be a little bit of an expert on what insurance companies are asking for, or do you have the ability to provide that for them? So that's kind of what we hope that you get out of this call here today for this common issue that we've seen. I'm going to have John now turn it back over to him. He's been working with some insurance carriers on some of the stats that he's seen. So let's put it back over to John real quick.
Thank you, Chris.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so perfect. So one of the things that we always try to drive, and I thrive myself within our side of the business to be a technical expert within consulting on compliance. And the difficulties with compliance, it's very industry specific. The thing with insurance, it is not. It is literally applied to every single organization out there. In this day and age, cybersecurity insurance is one of the functional things that they are going to get within the first couple of months of them starting their business. And so obviously, as we've been working with the carriers, and we've always trickled this conversation in the background, like 2 and 3 years ago, there's a lot of AIG claims out there, 5 quick questions and you'll get a coverage. Well, 3 years later, they've done the analysis and they've realized the significant amount of money that they've been losing over the years. So what this means is now they're having to increase the pricing. So in the last quarter of 2021, there was a 50% minimum increase. I've just got some feedback. And then obviously what we're going to see over the next couple of months, if not into the whole year of 2022, the actual monthly premiums are going to be staggeringly high. And obviously the main reason for this is because of the poor approach that the insurance companies took to providing cybersecurity insurance, and also not having a good understanding of actually what the true impact cost was. Other pieces that they're going to start doing is putting limits to actually how much coverage they will give you. I know obviously this is built into a lot of things, but they're going to start itemizing the specific amount of money. So like we work with Sentinel-1, they have $1 million cybersecurity warranty. But truly what that means is $1,000 per device. So they're obviously trying to save themselves and have a lot of these caveats and rabbit holes that they can go down to prevent themselves from losing money, because the ultimate goal of insurance company is not to keep you alive, it's actually just to make money. The retention periods as well. This is one that is obviously talking about renewals. These processes are now taking staggeringly longer process time. So you've got to be months ahead of the game versus just a quick phone call. And then additionally, when you do have the actual coverage in play, the actual response the insurance carrier is responding back to you after you've hit by ransomware, bearing in mind, if you get hit by ransomware, you are talking minutes that you want to have a recovery plan in place, versus what they're identifying here is at least a minimum of 24 to 48 hours before they can even start communicating with you. Coverage as well. This is going to be very interesting. Much like health insurance, I've got coverage for my teeth, coverage for my eyes, coverage for my liver, although I drink too much. But what they're going to do now within cybersecurity is they're going to very particularly identify what coverage they're going to provide to you. And the big talk of the topic at the moment is dropping ransomware coverage, which ultimately, when you start talking about cybersecurity insurance, that is the fundamentals of it. and one of the reasons why we're here today is obviously to give you some energy and some efforts on a mile-wide topic, covering today about an inch thick and giving some reading material after. But the carrier is obviously identifying and mandating a ton of, detect, respond processes that obviously haven't been in place just to allow you to get the basic coverage that you had previously. And then obviously the last thing that they are seeing is a significant high increase in frequency and severity of attacks. This is common. We are all seeing this. If anybody has anything to know knowledge about cybersecurity, attacks are on the rise, and the impact that we're seeing are obviously tremendous. And obviously there's a lot of pieces to that. So much like what the DoD are doing with their compliancy framework, insurance now are doing the same thing to see if they can, harden the environments that they cover, meaning they don't have to pay out as much. So on top of that as well, there are other trends that we are seeing in the industry for 2022, to kind of resonate a little bit more. The first one being government regulations. This again is a lot of things resolving around the same questions that the insurance carriers are after, but ultimately they're making sure that organizations are truly approaching cybersecurity in the right way to protect themselves. The second one, this is why we're here today. They are hardening the requirements to get you in, so they're not having to pay out as much. And then the next three, these are slightly different. The nation state involvement is on a rise. So what this means is no longer are we just seeing these small mama papa type attacks where Bob the hacker independently is going at it on himself. We're seeing nation state involved funded type attacks, the SolarWinds attack, the Microsoft incident, the Log4j attacks that we're seeing where these impacts of upstream companies, Microsoft, everybody uses Microsoft. And obviously that is not just something that you can quickly come to the table with. So we're seeing more sophisticated attacks. And then this is continuing into the supply chain attacks, which are obviously, already crippled with everything with regards to Corona and factories not being open. So as we're seeing more of this, it means that availability of technology is not going to be as easy to be able to be relied upon. And, the final one, I'll try not to swear, but, extremely common sense. The amount of ransomware that we are seeing nowadays is tremendously awful. And obviously is one of the main reasons why all of the 5 pieces, why we as an organization here and why the insurance carriers are requesting such a high scrutiny against the controls that they need.
Yeah, thank you, John, for that. Yeah, those are certainly some of the things we're seeing. And for our partners on the call, you may have seen something that's on the screen here. This is an example of some of the supplemental underwriting requirements that are being asked. Sometimes these documents are significantly longer, but you get the idea here. They're getting very specific in the amount of technology security controls that they're going to require. They're doing it to cover themselves, no doubt, but we're getting into as John mentioned earlier, just your simple 5 questions, one of which is, you're currently still alive. And it's changed, and it's not going to be like that anymore. And going forward, we're going to see this continue to become the standard. You'll search terminology in here specifically around EDR solutions, MFA. Previously looked at things even around detection and response, things that we pointed out in the NIST cybersecurity framework are currently usually not being done by the SMB. So there's all kinds of security controls over here on the right. And we'll take a look at some of these specific ones because we want to, again, make sure that we are all enabled to have these conversations, to make them be like when they come up, not like, oh man, they've already got insurance, this is going to be a tough sale. But as I mentioned before, a conversation starter, let's talk about that. I'm well aware of some of the things that you either are being asked for or will being asked for. And let's take a look at some of those here real quick. I would say by far and away, and John would probably agree, MFA or two-factor authentication continues to be one of the things that they're doing at least first. Almost everybody is asking for multi-factor authentication. We started to see a big push for that, almost a panicked push, if you will, towards the end of 2021, and we expect to see that continue, mainly because it's a relatively simple and straightforward, but a very effective deterrent. A company like us, we can help you get that set up and implemented and tied to specific applications relatively quickly. We'd rather, as John had mentioned before, get ahead of it and not wait. But MFA, two-factor authentication, we use Duo, is one of the #1 things that the insurance carriers are now requiring. And they're going to ask that this be tied to those critical applications like Office 365, Salesforce, Outlook, and any administrative accounts that would be critical to securing that organization. So that's by far the number one that we see. I would say a close second would be, are you doing phishing training? Are you doing awareness training for employees? One of my favorite quotes is that the weakest link in any organization continues to sit between the keyboard and the chair. We understand where the threats are coming from. The insurance carriers know where these threats originated from. They've done certainly their fair share of incident response that inevitably tie back to an employee clicking on some kind of link and somehow releasing their credentials. So doing some continuing phishing training and enhances that awareness, gets people a little click gun shy, reduces tremendously the impact to the insurance carrier. And they're not going to go for just a once a year sort of watch this video and send us an email and let us know that you watched it. Micro learning, constant reinforcement with accountability. So for example, the training awareness program that we put in place, not only for insurance purposes, but for anybody that has a requirement to do this type of training, is a combination of phishing campaigns with full reporting, as well as you can see in the bottom right, we partnered with a company called Ningio to provide that accountability and that reinforcement with some video training and so on and so forth. This is going to help them check that box. It's extremely important for doing training and awareness, I think, just in general, but for many regulatory requirements, for many vendor-to-vendor requirements, they're going to ask, are you training your employees? Want to make sure that you are all in a position to say, I can help you with that. I have a program we can put in place that will help you do just that. It's something that we can help you implement and set up, again, relatively easily. And really kind of tied almost hand in hand with this is the next one, which is email security. This is the number one attack vector for hackers, especially in the SMB world. And 94% of those threats can be traced back when an incident or a breach happens at the SMB to email. So when you combine email security with the previous security control training awareness, the reason why they're asking for these things to be in place is because they know that's the problem. And so combining a request for training, employee training and awareness on a regular basis with some type of technology from an email standpoint, they know they're going to be able to shut down a good chunk of it. And again, put themselves in a better position as they reside in that respond category. Okay, so all these things would fall under protection. The attack vectors typically used here: business email compromise, domain spoofing, impersonation. John and I are on calls all week where these kinds of things happen. So again, the way we approach this and the way the insurance companies are going to continue to ask that this be done is a combination of ongoing phishing training combined with some technology, protective technology like an email security gateway. John, did you want to just touch on maybe some of the email authentication protocols that are part of this? I don't want to get super technical, but just some of the things that the insurance carriers are asking that our partners on the call can provide.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things what I do like about this statements, the SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, these are technical statements that, you know, when you see how the question is worded by the insurance broker, it really identifies that the underwriter didn't know what specifically they were asking. So for these three pieces, these are very simple text files, but I can honestly tell for me, it's extremely simple, but that's only because I do it day in and day out. For anyone, even an IT administrator, if you haven't done one of these, it does become an overwhelming task that is a 5-minute job to do, but all in vain of providing a internet-side security to protect your domain on a internet-facing basis. And obviously, you know, in a combination, as Chris was alluding to, like the previous three, for the most part, you know, throw a number out there, 90% of the attacks would be mitigated and destroyed based on just them three requirements that we've covered right now. And obviously that's all in vain of what their insurance company are requiring, so they don't have to pay out and they can save money. And this is obviously why the conversation of having this is very particularly important. The next one that we'll get into, and this is to continue that kind of, the underwriter has Googled something and found something out quite well, but doesn't understand what the hell he's asking, is but is correct in the vein, is they're asking about like, how is your approach for RDP, remote desktop protocol? And to what Chris has said, I'm not going to go more than an inch deep on this, but remote desktop protocol, remote access to a computer. You know, many people do not approach this in the correct manner. And in January 2020, there was 200,000 events of these a day, and we've seen a staggering increase to 1.4 million by April 2020. Obviously, these stats are fairly old, so I can only imagine it's in the 3 million, so on and so forth. Now, after this presentation, I'm going to get you a white paper. At the time of writing that white paper, I found 6,000 open devices connected to the internet in that 30-second window that I scanned. And the element behind this is RDP allows someone to get onto your computer, bypass everything, just because it's connected to the internet and there's no protocol around it. Now, the practice that I'm saying that the underwriter is asking the question incorrectly, and the reason why in the top right corner it says Palo Alto, realistically, the approach needs to be, do you have an implemented next generation firewall that is properly configured? That's a big important piece, and continually managed. So again, this is an approach in which, as we have our conversations over the next year, you'll find we concentrate on multiple verticals, network being one of the bigger ones. And obviously this being an approach where if you can have the right technology managed and configured correctly, we've covered and destroyed 90% based on MFA training and secure email security. Now, when it gets to email attacks, network attacks, there aren't as many out there in the wild, but when they are seen, they are painful. So obviously, if we can eliminate them, it's not going to be painful. It's not going to cost anybody anything. And obviously, that is one of the reasons why it's happening. The next one, endpoint detect and response, EDR. This is one hell of a buzzword right now. EDR, MDR, XDR, everybody's hearing it. Nobody quite understands what it is. So I'm just going to quickly cover that. Antivirus, when we all grew up, was the big thing. That technology is dead. My eyes. It still exists in certain aspects for your college kid laptops and stuff like that, but it is a dead process. That has recently then been replaced by what's called APP, endpoint protection. And then on top of that, there is a strategy around that, which is called endpoint detect and respond. Now, I've and we'll go into this a little bit later in one of our other series, but the element of this is not just to look for threats like antivirus used to, but it's actually just to look at everything. Understand everything that's operating on the endpoint. Now, the reason why the insurance carriers care is because email, that's obviously lightweight, it's up in the cloud. Network, typically it's removed from complications on the network, the firewall and stuff like that. But if you get to the endpoint, you want to talk about pain and expensiveness, because this is where the people are and this is where the data is. So this is where ransomware resides. So EDR is probably one of the most critical elements of any cybersecurity framework. And if you're utilizing the semantics, the McAfee, the Windows Bitdefender, you are not sufficiently protecting your organization. Go play roulette. Yep, you might win by putting red all on red. But ultimately, when that number comes in, if you don't have the right protection and somebody tries to attack you, not having this in place will really hurt the organization. So when they are asking about EDR, it's about having, and that we carry two of the best technologies out there, BlackBerry Silence and Sentinel-1. These are the technologies that we need to see, but it's no longer just a technology game. It's a technology, people, and process. And that's what EDR really brings to the table, is having that aggregation of all three. And that's, again, one of the reasons why the insurance carriers are making sure you have that, because these technologies are going to identify, detect, and then enable you to respond in a timely manner in order to prevent ransomware in 0 days.
Yeah, John, I'll just add before we go to the next one that just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a tremendous increase specifically in insurance carriers asking for EDR to be put in place. So definitely keep your eye on that one. And again, we're here to help you do that. All right, John, you want to just kind of finish us off here with one of the bigger trends that we've seen here under vulnerability management?
Yeah, so I'm obviously within the cyber realm. I'm in the technical realm. Log4j is something that scared everybody's Christmas at the end of last year. This was a vulnerability in a Apache server that basically would allow people just to walk in. In 2016, there was a very similar attack that you might have remembered or heard about, which hit Equifax. and Equifax actually targeted in the same vein Apache servers. For Equifax, they did not do any vulnerability scanning or patching. So they sat there for 9 months unaware that they were compromised, and that's why everybody's data is now on the internet. So because of that, and all the efforts that you can do with training and awareness, email security, next generation firewalls, endpoint detection and response, if you are not patching vulnerabilities in your environment, you are opening yourself up to compromise. And organizations, insurance companies are finding this out. So you might have everything in play, but when you get compromised and the post-speech incident guy like myself comes to your organization to do the review and identify that, the X server, the Microsoft Exchange, whatever you had in your environment wasn't appropriately patched because you weren't doing vulnerability scanning to know, I'm just going to say that you failed on all accounts and not apply any refund to you. So vulnerability management has been around since the early 2000s, and it still today is done so poorly. So as you can see in orange there, we run vulnerability scans as part of our service once a month. That's typically enough. We'll do quick respond ones when we see things like Log4j come out. But as you can see there, critical events need to be patched within 24 hours. These are some SLAs that are identified by the insurance carriers and recommended by NIST. That is quite a big burden to be done. So obviously this is one of the reasons why most organizations don't have the time and resources to be able to do it, which is very contradictory because, now to get insurance, you now also have to have a cybersecurity practice. So it's quite a big process. It's one that's been continuously left to the side for years, but patching is obviously a fundamental, easy process that can fundamentally save your whole organization. And I think this might be one of the last ones that we'll cover, but third-party connections. 2015, maybe even 2014, when Target was attacked, quite a famous hack. Target weren't actually the target of the hack. The hackers identified that the HVAC company that serviced their stores basically had a backdoor connection to their environment to be able to connect and have everything with the thermometers check and all that good jazz. So what that actually truly meant was I didn't have to hack Target. I could go after the HVAC company who had zero IT infrastructure and security. So what we're seeing in this day and age is no longer, or not no longer necessarily, but what we're doing is as we're adapting and creating this ecosystem of interconnected SMB companies that have finance companies, managed service providers with keys and locks to our obviously organization, if they are not keeping up with their their cybersecurity framework, they can be compromised. And if you're not managing the connections that they have into your organization, the hacker just walks in. So in the same vein as the previous one, if you get hacked because the HVAC company was not patching themselves and Target just had a welcome in HVAC company attitude, they're going to turn around and say you weren't appropriately protecting your perimeter. And therefore, even if that company did have mild security, because you had no controls over the connection and their access to your environment, we are not going to protect you anymore. And all of this can be managed as identified as below. The connections are obviously established through a next generation firewall, and the configuration of that from a technical perspective is fairly easy to manage and create. So obviously it's a 30-second conversation that needs to happen once every 6 months, and obviously that's going to obviously enable you to have connectivity, but realistically connectivity insurance, but realistically a protective stance of your environment. And as we've identified there, the two main attitudes to that are ensuring that the connections are encrypted for loss of data, and also there's multi-factor authentication enabled into that, which is a circular one from the first subject Chris commented on. And again, this all works in vain to protect the organization in order to reduce the amount of money that insurance companies are paying for. And obviously with that, with the third-party connections, you'll find that most of the parties that the organizations that we see and work with are actually going to be required to have, multi-factor place or insurance in place to be able to work with them. So again, it's kind of like a rock and a hard place. So you've got to do it for multiple reasons. And then really the last one, and again, all these questions come in different formats, different methodologies, but there is this consistency that we've just covered maybe 8 or 9 different subjects, network, endpoint, training and awareness, email security. And obviously we've been doing this for years, and I've not really cared for what insurance were asking. I've not really cared for what compliance was requiring. My whole goal was to create something that would protect an organization on every single element. Now, 5 years later, they've all caught up to actually what I've been preaching for years. So the last piece of this, and traditionally you could put some technology in play and create that preventative policy that would assist to reduce the risk to the organization. But it only reduces it, it does not stop it. And that's the big element in why monitoring is required. And the big one is obviously on the emphasis of 24/7. We have a lot of organizations say we have monitoring, but it's an MSP who will do it between 9 and 5, and they might have like a skeleton crew after hours, but they're not proactively monitoring it. And that's obviously why SOC and SIM as a service is becoming a big thing. And the reason for this is much like EDR. When you see actionable events happening on an environment, you need to be able to do analysis. And obviously the NIST framework's up in the top right. So the identification, protection, detection, and response is a formatable control framework in which if we detect something, we need to assess it. And then we need to assess to see if it's actionable and actually should exist in the environment. It could be the IT administrator just doing some patching, because obviously that's now a requirement he has to do. But at the same vein, if he's on holiday and the connection's coming from Russia, maybe that's not actually him. So the monitoring piece of it enables us to have a analysis response in a timely manner. The last piece I kind of cover on this would be, most ransomware attacks we see is after post-incidents, we identified that the hackers were in the environment for 3 months. If you've got half passive monitoring in place, you're going to find and detect things within a matter of hours and days. And hours and days is a tremendously quick time. For us, we thrive ourselves on being on seconds, minutes, and hours. But, just having this monitoring makes an awareness of the organization and the ecosystem. So when actions are actually happening in the environment that are not quite 100% bad, you can have somebody look through them and quickly do a triage and analysis to make sure, and obviously this is all in vain for what the insurance companies are doing, if actionable actions are happening before they become ransomware or critical infrastructure damaging events, they are reviewed and minimized to reduce the amount of actual coverage and or claims that are being put into the cybersecurity insurance company. So, the plug for what we're going to do, and is it's the simple conversation. You guys are obviously talking to your to your clients. You're having these conversations, and what we've seen a big trend of is as you are pivoting your business to start talking about cyber, there is that fear factor of, if I bring up this subject, am I going to be able to know what to bring next? And the elements in which I tried to allude to a second ago is we've been doing everything that insurance has been asking for, compliance has been asking for, and really what cybersecurity is needed for an organization for years now. And in essence, within the Haven platform, we have an element for each single question that has been asked. If it's an RDP, we've got the next generation firewall through Palo Alto. EDR, we have Silence and SentinelOne, email, Mimecast, and so on and so forth. So the aspects of that is if you can have that conversation, you can have the confidence that as long as it's an SMB organization south of 2,000 seats, you have an organization that can support you, enabling to continue that conversation to support the organization.
Yeah, thank you, John, for that. That's an excellent summary there. Yeah, so again, we're here to educate, and hopefully you found some information here very helpful in terms of how you might approach an SMB and do a better job of perhaps handling the objections that we continue to run to around, I've got cyber insurance, so I'm already good. We're going to see a massive change going forward. We already have. And just to know that we're here to help you with any of these controls that your prospects and customers may be asked to do or to put into place, that you're going to be in a position, hopefully better informed through today's session about what those things are and where they're coming from and what's causing it. But also know that you have a partner that's going to be able to help you kind of to be able to get through that. So as we wrap up here, and again, just if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in to the chat, I guess, on the side. But let's take a look, just some key takeaways that we have here as we wrap up. As we discussed, a lot of companies, especially on the SMB side, are relying on cyber insurance to protect against attacks. And as we've seen a couple different times, that is the last box in the NIST framework. And that is where the cyber insurance carriers reside, and they're not going to go for it anymore. There's 4 more boxes that are ahead of them, and they're going to do whatever they can as they continue to experience these losses to put in underwriting requirements that are going to be put into place in order for you to get or keep your insurance. Sometimes what they're being asked when they send that form that we showed you an example of, and 20 different things on one page, another 20 on another, can be confusing or misunderstood to the SMBs. And so when we have this opportunity to both not only offer from an advisory role, but to provide the actual tools and controls and help them get implemented so that they can start answering those questions correctly, getting and keeping their insurance. By no means are we saying that they shouldn't have that insurance. It's an extremely important part of the framework, but times are changing. And all of our partners here on the call today can be in a good position to be an advisor, to understand a little bit about what they're running into. And it's not so much really optional anymore. It's becoming a requirement. And if there's one thing that a lot of the SMBs will do from a cybersecurity standpoint, it's buy insurance. And if that's now a problem, it offers an excellent opportunity for you to be educated on this topic and have partners that are going to be able to help you put that thing in place so that they can maintain those underwriting requirements.
So,
go ahead, John.
Yeah, we have a question. So what's a good response for a firm who fall back on their PCI compliance certification as a reason not to purchase specialized security services? So on that aspect, and the question would be, are they relying on a third-party company to provide the PCI services that they do? Or, they may be in a place at the moment where they already have insurance, so they're not yet feeling the pain of the insurance carrier turn around and say, no longer is it 5 more questions. So PCI in itself, from a compliance perspective, will require a lot of security and controls. If they don't have them in play, especially with PCI, the actual fines that you can have for not actually protecting that data can be very important. So, obviously all of this today is in pitching for what we provide to our organizations and the services we provide. But, if I wasn't pitching, and Chris is obviously the sales, I'm the cybersecurity person, it doesn't matter what organization that I work for, I would make sure that they have everything that we've covered today, because even if it's not a compliance or an insurance thing, if they truly get targeted and don't have what we've covered today, it's going to hurt. And that's where they've got to do the return on investment to identify, is the service requirement in there going to be sufficient enough that if I do seek downtime, am I going to be able to recover from that? Am I going to be impacted by reputational damage? And then, with PCI, that's all financial data. So the financial fees or fines associated with that are painful in themselves. So I don't know where they fall into with regards to the timing for their insurance piece, but there is going to be a requirement in that compliance that they need to have some form of inheritance security view through insurance. So I'll be intrigued to see on that. And then compliance itself for PCI does have some stipulations to meet these. The question would be the complexity of how you approach it, because it might say have antivirus. And if they've got antivirus in, great, they've met the requirements for compliance, but that doesn't still mean that they're secure. Hopefully that kind of answered the question. So I appreciate that. Chris?
Yeah. Thank you, John. I would agree. I mean, the PCI requirements are going to be high, as are many of the regulatory standards in terms of things that we need to do. And a lot of it will cross over with this. I mean, I think the interesting thing would be, PCI is related to credit card data, HIPAA would be related to health, CMMC is Department of Defense, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of much more stringent things and things that we need to, requirements that they have. A lot of the things what we're seeing down here, like we're talking about today, it's starting to kind of trickle down, I guess would be one way to look at it. I would think that if you're doing PCI compliance, you're probably checking most of the boxes required for underwriting on insurance. I'm talking about, somebody that just sells apples somewhere or something completely unrelated to any of the major compliances are still going to be subjected to some of these things. So, but PCI or any of the other big government regulatory things, certainly having cyber insurance in place is going to be a requirement. So you can see that there'd be some significant crossover there. I don't know if there's any others from the group. I did get one directed to me, which was when do we expect these insurers to put some of these policies in place, and what are they asking for? So just I can answer that in one question. So they have already started. I would say we started to see this in the fall of last year. It really ramped up at the end of this year with people kind of trying to do stuff at the last minute. Perhaps it was put off, whatever the case might be. And then just sort of the second part of that question, when are they starting and what are they asking for? I would say MFA and EDR are the two most often that we see, and training and awareness and phishing campaigns and testing would be right in the mix. But this has already started, and it's going to continue again to, as we pointed out through numerous examples, why the insurance companies are doing this now. But look, in the end, it's all going to be good. As I said here a couple times, puts all of us in a great advisory position and a sales position to be able to help these SMBs take care and check this box for cyber insurance or any other requirements and compliances that they may have to adhere to. I don't know if my team sees any other questions. I know we're getting close to the end here. All right. So let's just real quick, again, we appreciate y'all coming. A couple of the other things we're going to be looking at, as we mentioned, I already have one of those. That's a pretty broad topic, but we're going to hit some additional SMB objections that we run into. And again, not how to overcome those objections, but how to handle them, how to be proactive and start asking questions or making statements, assumptive statements, so that you put yourself in a better position to hit those 4 or 5 different things we run into on a regular basis when trying to start conversations with SMBs on cybersecurity. John mentioned earlier the differences between EDR, MDR, XDR, and so forth, alphabet soup, but we'll help sort that out for you so that you can have those conversations with your customers. Of course, EDR specifically applies to the insurance piece here today. And then later down the line in April, we're going to talk about some of the misconceptions and naming conventions around things like vulnerability scanning and penetration testing. Are they the same? Are they different? Who would want one versus the other? So we'll talk through that as well. We're going to continue to try and help provide you with some tools in some of these 1-hour sessions that'll enable you to just be better suited to have these conversations with your SMB prospects and customers. And so we certainly appreciate that. If you have any further questions, want to talk through this offline or a specific opportunity, definitely please reach out. As John mentioned, he's going to also be putting out a white paper related to this topic that we will make sure to get everybody who's attended today's webinar.